Good evening. Welcome everybody to this, the first virtual meeting of the Pensions Committee. My name is Councillor Pat Clary, Chair of the committee. Could I just start by getting confirmation that the webcast is working properly? Lovely, thank you. So my first task this evening will be to ask our legal officer, Colin Hughes, to undertake a roll call of those committee members present this evening. Before doing so, I've had apologies from Councillor Paulette Lappin. Can I ask if there are any other apologies regarding attendance? No, I'm not getting any other apologies, so I'll just hand over to Colin, who'll do a roll call of the members present.
Yes, Chair. When your name is called, could you please turn your camera on and declare your presence and then turn off your microphone. So starting Councillor Mrs. J. Ashton. Ashton? No, doesn't seem to be here. Mr. Roger Bannister. Mr. Roger Bannister? No, not here. Councillor Ian Byrne. Ian Byrne? No. Councillor Martin Bond. Martin Bond?
I'm present, Chair.
Yes, okay. Councillor Chris Carubia. Chris Carubia?
Yeah, hello, I'm present, thank you.
Okay. Pat Clary, yes, obviously.
Yes, I'm here, thank you.
Tony Cottier. Councillor Tony Cottier? No. George Davies, yes, I know.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Steve Foulkes?
Yes, on my phone, so it's a bit dodgy at the moment.
Okay. Councillor Andrew Gardner? Andrew, yes. Are you there, Councillor? Andrew Gardner?
Hang on.
No.
Yeah, I'm here, Colin. Just fact
You are? You're here,
yes.
Are you? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Tony Jones?
Yes, Chair, present. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Brian Kenny?
Yes, Councillor Brian Kenny, present. Thank
Yes.
you.
Now, Paulette Lappin, I don't believe is here. Councillor Cherry Povall? Cherry Povall? No, doesn't seem to be here. And Councillor Les Rowlands?
Yes, I'm here, Colin. Thanks very much.
Okay. So the people present are Martin Bond, Chris Carubia, Pat Clary, George Davies, Steve Foulkes, Andrew Gardner, Tony Jones, Brian Kenny and Les Rowlands. Obviously, if anyone joins later on, if they could please let us know, and we'll add you to the people who are attending the meeting. But we've got a quorum anyway. Yeah.
Lovely.
Okay.
Thank you, Colin. So could I just welcome Councillors Bond, Foulkes and Rowlands to the committee, and I'd also like to thank the departing councillors, Councillors John Fulham and Stuart Whittingham, for their contribution to the committee in the past. I would also like to pay tribute to Councillor Geoffrey Watt, who very sadly passed away recently. Geoffrey was a long-standing member and a former chair of this committee. He was greatly respected by everyone on the committee and beyond. So I would therefore ask that we all observe a minute's silence in memory of Geoffrey. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say thank you very much for welcoming me to the committee, and just say a great big thank you for recognising Jeffrey.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all, Liz. Thank you very much. Right. Item 2 is the Members' Code of Conduct, Declarations of Interest. So members of the committee are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests in connection with any items on the agenda and state the nature of the interest. So can I ask if there are any declarations of interest? We've got Tony Jones.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Both myself and my wife are scheme members. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Andrew Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I am a de minimis member of the scheme, and I should get a statement and find out exactly how de minimis it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. George Davies.
Same one all the time, Pat, which is my wife is a member. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, George. And Les Rowlands as well.
Yeah, thanks. As I've just heard, George, my wife is Education Development Officer, so she's a member of the pension scheme, so I'd like to highlight that.
Lovely. Thank you very much. I think that's it. Thank you all.
Sorry, Chair. Cherry Povall. My daughter's a member of the pensions.
You just got in time there, Cherry. Okay. Yeah, we'll record that as well.
Struggled to get up to this.
Yeah. Well, you're here now. We can see and hear you. Thanks for that. Okay, item 3 is the minutes, to approve the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of February 2020. So could I move approval of those minutes and ask for a seconder?
Yes, I'll second those, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Povall. So I will take the minutes as agreed by assent unless anyone now wants to raise an issue. No. Thank you all. If I could just remind people to take their hands down unless they actually wish to speak. So those minutes are approved. Items 4 and items 5 I think we can take together. That's the audit plan and the audit findings report. I think we do have a representative from the auditor. Grant Patterson is here. Yes, Grant, are you here?
Yes, I am here, Chair. And also Stuart Basnett, the audit manager, is on the call as well to support me if need be. So.
Lovely. Thank you both very much. Well, I'll hand over to you initially, Grant, to take us through items 4 and 5.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thanks for the introduction. We are going to take sort of 4 and 5 running into each other. And basically, that's mainly because the committee back in March was cancelled as a result of the pandemic. So what you're receiving today is the audit plan and our plan addendum. And that's primarily because they then run into the findings in the audit findings report. But I wasn't planning to go through the audit plan and the audit addendum in great detail. As an overview, we've conducted our audit work remotely since August, and it is substantially complete. And I suppose in that I'd like to express my thanks to Donna Smith and her finance team for their help, contribution and flexibility during this period of working, which has gone pretty well for us, and we should hit statutory framework deadlines. You will note in the audit plan that Robin Baker was originally down as your engagement lead. I'm afraid Robin is still off work poorly. Therefore, I've continued as engagement lead for the audit for this year. I was your engagement lead in 2018-19, so I've re-engaged with the audit, and I still remain independent of the fund in those respects. So I think just very quickly in terms of the audit plan and addendum, the audit plan highlighted originally 3 significant risks for us as auditors: management override of controls, and that was in respect, it's non-rebuttable under auditing standards, and that will lead to a focus on looking at journals that the fund undertook, the valuation of direct property investments and the valuation of level 3 investments. The slight change in that from last year is we've disaggregated your direct property investments from your level 3 investments, and what we have done is appoint our own valuation expert in relation to those valuation estimates for this year, and that's because of the growing challenge from in terms of quality perspective from being able to challenge the assumptions used by valuers from an auditing perspective. We've added one new significant risk in relation to the audit this year, and that does relate to the pandemic. Now, whilst within that it does cover about the uncertainties around valuations at the year end, really because we'd already covered that as part of our work on your level 3 investments, a lot of the focus has been on around how well the fund has moved to remote working and elements like that. So those are the sort of significant risks that were really in the plan. The plan has been through the pensions board. I believe, Chair, you've also seen it as part of the remote. So I wasn't going to go into any further detail on the plan unless members had any questions. And then I was going to really come on to the audit findings report.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Well, there aren't any hands raised, so please do continue.
Okay. So I'm now going to move to the audit findings report, and I'm going to start effectively in my pack. It looks like it's page 35 if you've got it in paper, and I think if you're on the PDF, it's page 39. There's about a 4-page difference between that. So really, in highlighting the work we've undertaken for you, you've got the statement of accounts to follow and also the annual report. We've identified one adjustment to the financial statements from the draft financial statements preventing us to audit, and that is a £5.8 million adjustment in relation to the net asset statement reported position, and that's because in the draft accounts it incorrectly omitted derivatives or total return investment derivative swaps of 5.843 million for the net asset statement. So those have now been reinstated into the accounts. And management have confirmed that the accounts will be amended to take account of those. I think one thing I need to draw to your attention, as I alluded to earlier, because of COVID and the pandemic, one of the impacts has been to cause significant, and I'm sure you're aware of the pension scheme, disruption to property markets and a significant reduction in property transactions over the financial year end particularly. And therefore, from an auditing perspective, what we would say observable inputs, including those sort of market data, there's increased uncertainties around that and indices. So as I said earlier, in change of our plan, we did engage our own valuer to help us with that. And as a result of that, also turmoil in the markets, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors issued guidance to its members that material uncertainty valuation disclosures were likely to be required. So that doesn't invalidate the evaluations are undertaking. It's just that they will be disclosing greater uncertainties. And you've disclosed that within your financial statements. And given that the value of your direct property specifically is around about 472 million at year end, as your auditors, I think that's fundamental to readers to understand that the valuers of those properties have issued those material uncertainty or valuation uncertainty disclosures. So as a result, what we are proposing to do as your auditor is to inclusion of an emphasis and matter paragraph within our auditor's report highlighting the material uncertainty as a result of COVID-19. I think what is important, however, for you to recognise is it's not a modification or qualification of our auditor's report. What it is saying that you've appropriately disclosed the matters in your financial statements, and we just feel a reader is fundamental to their understanding that they should read those parts of those reports. Therefore, we highlight it in our report. Okay, so it's new, and I would say you're not alone. I was in that sense. I think you'll be seeing this across a majority of pension funds, and certainly if you're you'll be similar disclosures within the sort of main council accounts around their property, plant and equipment. So that's to do with clinking into the pandemic. It's not something specific to you as a pension fund. In respect of other key considerations for you as a pensions committee, and that's more relating to, I suppose, the recommendations that then flow from this into Wirral Council Audit and Risk Committee. There's one area where we have identified what we consider to be non-material items, and for your pension fund, materiality is we use 1% of net assets, so that's around about 88 million for us in total. Is that when we were undertaking our work on your investments, we identified an error which we've extrapolated to say that there's a potential overstatement of assets by about £31 million, and that's not a material misstatement for us, and that's shown on page 39 of the paper, on page 43 of the electronic documents, and as a result of that, that is principally a function of the timing. You make an estimate because of the close down. sometimes at the end of December, and you project that forward to the end of March. And we normally do see these variations, but generally they're quite small, and we wouldn't normally be reporting them. But because of the turmoil in the markets, because of the pandemic over March, we're seeing them bigger variations this year. And again, you're not alone in that. But given the size of the variation, management are proposing not to amend the accounts, and therefore I suppose we're comfortable in that from your auditors, and it will not distort a readers of the account, will not impact upon our true and fair opinion. But as part of that, we do need the pension committee to agree with management or recommend to Wirral's Audit and Risk Committee that you're happy that in terms of not to adjust the accounts. And we've also included that in a letter of rep. So that's one decision for the pension committee to make. Just briefly saying what we're looking at significant risks and the overall finding the audit. No change in our materiality on the audit for this year. As I said earlier, we believe that the fund responded well to COVID-19 in terms of remote working and sometimes going into the office. There were no issues noted in our rebuttal of the revenue risk as well. Level 3s, we've almost completed our work on those. And as I say, that material misstatement or non-material misstatement that we're asking you not to adjust for, or that recommend not to adjust for, has covered that area. I would just say our work is substantially complete. So where are we on the audit? We've completed our work on what we call your level 1, level 2 investments. We have some work to do on level 3 around derivatives, and that's with our technical team for valuations. Directly held property, we've now got all the information back that we need. We are still awaiting, I think, final responses from our inquiries of the chair of Wirral's Audit Committee, but they're expected this week. And we've just about completed our work on minor disclosure notes. Given the size of your fund, we have a review partner as well, just to check that we've met with all the firm's requirements, and that's still subject to review. And we keep open our post-balance sheet events work. But overall, we're not expecting to find any changes that would impact upon our opinion, and that's where we are on the audit at this point in time. So I'm happy to take questions.
Lovely, thanks very much, Grant. And obviously a few little bits and pieces outstanding, which are helpfully highlighted in red in the report. But obviously we note the main recommendation that you anticipate that you'll provide the pension fund with a non-modified audit report. Anybody have any questions or comments for Grant? Okay, we haven't got any hands going up. You'll be pleased to hear, Grant. We don't have any specific recommendations for items 4 and 5. However, I am advised that we should formally note the content of the audit plan and the audit findings report. And further to the new constitution agreed by Wirral Council, items for noting will also need to be proposed and seconded and formally approved by the committee. So I will propose that we note the audit findings and report. Could I ask the Vice Chair to second that, please?
Yes, I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Povall. I'll take that by assent unless anybody wants to pipe up now. Okay, that's all good. Thanks very much for that, Grant. I'm advised that further to Grant's report, we should move to item 7 and come back to item 6. So item 7 is the statement of accounts for 2019 and 20 and the letter of representation that goes with that. Can I hand over to the Director of Pensions, Peter Wallach, to take us through that, please?
Yep, certainly, Chair. So thank you to Grant Thornton for the report on the audit findings report. So the statement of accounts, as the report sets out, the purpose of this report is to present members with the audited statement of accounts for Merseyside Pension Fund and to respond to the audit findings report. The statement of accounts, as the audit findings report indicates, subject to outstanding work, Grant Thornton has indicated that there will be an unqualified opinion with the inclusion of an emphasis of matter paragraph, which he's, I think, helpfully explained around the unquoted investments that are held in the fund. So as well as our property holdings, we hold things like infrastructure, private equity, which are difficult to value. And indeed, post 31st March, it's pleasing to see that markets in general have recovered. So I think members should be comfortable with the position as reported at the 31st of March. The audit opinion will be issued following final completion of the audit, consideration of the audit findings report, and approval of the amended statement of accounts at both Pensions Committee tonight and then the Audit and Risk Management Committee. And then subject to this, the accounts will form the basis of the annual report for the year ended 31st of March 2020. In addition, a letter of representation on behalf of the committee has been prepared, which gives assurances to the auditor on various aspects relating to the pension fund. So the recommendation, Chair, is that Pensions Committee approves the audited statement of accounts for 2019-20, considers the amendments to the accounts, the audit findings report and the letters of representation. And then the second recommendation is that Pensions Committee refers the recommendations to the Audit and Risk Management Committee. That's because the pension fund accounts form part of Wirral's overall accounts and therefore need to be, Wirral's audit needs to be completed before the whole matter can be finalised. The report sets out further information on the background, but I think those points have mainly been covered by the auditor in his presentation. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Peter. Any members have questions for Peter? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands going up. So Peter has outlined the recommendations that are contained in agenda item 7 of the report. Can I move approval of those recommendations and ask the Vice Chair to second that?
Yes, I'll second those, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Povall. Again, I will take that approval by assent unless anybody wants to speak now. No? Okay, thank you all very much. Those recommendations are approved. So that takes us back to item 6, which is the annual reports and accounts. So again, Peter, I will hand over to you to present those, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the report is to provide members with the fund's annual report and accounts for 2019-20. The recommendation is that members approve the annual report for the pension fund. I recognise it's a very lengthy appendix to the report, which is the fund's report and accounts. To give assurances to members, the report and accounts and the accompanying narrative has been obviously reviewed by officers of the fund. It's been reviewed by the auditor. Certain elements have been subject to scrutiny, and following a referral to Audit Risk Management Committee, the proposal is that approval is given for the accounts to be published. But there's a statutory requirement for us to provide members with a full copy of the report and accounts, which is why there's a lengthy appendix to the report, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Peter. Just a couple of things I'd like to highlight for members and anybody watching in from the accounts. Page 14 indicates the employer base continues to grow, is now in excess of 200. And that number is growing further due to the academisation of schools and the outsourcing of facility management. So I think that's noteworthy. Page 19 refers to the very positive improvements in the overall funding level achieved in recent years. And that's obviously created an opportunity to review our investment risk, and that will be discussed later in the agenda. Page 25 details the fund's very positive investment performance relative to benchmark over a 1, 3 and a 5-year period. So that's obviously extremely positive, and just like to give my thanks as chair to all those who've contributed to that very positive performance. Can I ask if anybody has any questions or comments on the back of the annual report? Okay, no questions or comments. So as Peter indicated, the recommendation is that members approve the annual report of the Merseyside Pension Fund for publication. So I will move that recommendation and again ask the Vice Chair to second that, please.
Yes, I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Povall. And again, I will take that by assent unless anybody wants to indicate otherwise. No. Okay, that recommendation is formally approved. Thank you all. Okay, item 8 is the Pension Board review for 2019-20 and the work plan for 2020-21. Now, I'm pleased to say that the Chair of the Pension Board, John Raisin, is with us tonight, so I'm going to hand over to John to present this item. Evening, John.
Evening, Chair. Thank you, Chair. This report really covers two issues. Firstly, the independent chair's report, and secondly, a change to the terms of reference of the board. As you know, we've been meeting virtually. We've already met twice virtually, on the 8th of June and on the 14th of September. And there's another meeting on the 10th of November. But it's been felt by the officers, and the board completely agrees with this, that the terms of reference need to be amended just to regularise the conditions in which these can take place. And on page 2 of Appendix 2, under the statement of purpose, it's very clear that a virtual committee can be held, or a virtual board can be held, but only with the express permission of the Director of Pensions in consultation with the independent chair. And furthermore, we will not have hybrid meetings, i.e. it'll either be a complete virtual meeting or an actual meeting which is normally held in Liverpool. So hopefully we will get back to Liverpool meetings in due course. So I just think we wanted to make it clear that this is an exceptional case at the moment, and therefore meetings will take place virtually, but they won't once this is over.
John, could I just stop you briefly? Your audio is breaking up a little bit. It's a bit difficult to hear. Would you mind turning off your camera? It might just help improve the quality of the sound.
Does that help at all?
I think it does, but please carry on. We can just about make out what you're saying, so hopefully it'll improve now.
I'll move closer to the... is that any better, Chair?
It is better than before, John. Thank you.
Well, so on page 6 of the second appendix, there's also the process for conducting virtual meetings. So those changes are before you for consideration. The pension board is content with them. So obviously, if you're content, they will then, go to full council for approval. The second part of the report is my annual review of the pension board, which, as you know, under the terms of reference, I'm required to report to yourself and the committee once a year. This is the 5th occasion on which I have done that. It's quite a long report, it's 15 pages. I don't intend to read it all out to you, but just to pick out a few highlights. Last year, at the end of last year, on the 9th of December, the council again approved a change to the terms of reference of the board. And this really changed the position from the board meeting 4 times annually to a position where the board is interacting with the administration authority on an ongoing basis, because the chair and the director are now required effectively to liaise on an ongoing basis, and the board is, under its terms of reference, needs to consult with me on policies of the fund prior to them actually, being finalised. So we're really building in the board as actually commenting during the process of policy formulation rather than simply at the end, which I think is a very positive thing. And I'd thank the administrative authority for that change. In terms of board meetings, we had 4 scheduled last year. 3 took place. 1 had to be cancelled because it was due on the 31st of March due to COVID. But I have included that in the table of meetings because the Director of Pensions and myself had already begun to talk about the agenda. He and his office has already begun to prepare the reports, so I've included that meeting as if it took place. I'd like to stress that we, again, receive reports on a broad range of LGPS issues. But I think we received things or reports on two particular issues which I really want to emphasise, and which perhaps will come to the fore more as we go forward. The first is the good governance review of the LGPS, which is Scheme Advisory Board is commissioned, and which we received a couple of reports on, and I know you have, and also the McCLOUD case. I would stress that I think, based not only on what I've seen at the board, but also in my work with 4 other LGPS funds across the country, these are 2 absolutely crucial issues, and I'd commend the officers for having brought them to our attention and for the way they've covered and presented those. I think it's also very pleasing to note the way the valuation has been carried out by the Merseyside Fund. The reports we received were very clear that the actual valuation had been subject to a proper consultation with the employers, as had the funding strategy statement. This wasn't, as I have to say, it does happen in some places. This didn't happen at the last moment where these documents are a fait accompli. They weren't. They were properly consulted, and that again is very pleasing to hear. Again, the internal audit reports for last year were very positive, and that is good to see. Pensions admin, as always, remained, I think, a crucial issue for ourselves, because we are a board of employers and employees, and I would thank the head of pensions admin for the very detailed reports that she presented to us, and also for the way in which she answered the numerous questions that my colleagues on the board placed before her. Asset pooling, of course, continued last year. I would say it's extremely positive that the Northern Pool has put 3 employee reps on the joint committee of 9, 6 councils and 3 trade union reps. I think that's very positive. It's also an excellent example to the other LGPS pools, because I don't think there's another pool that has acted so positively towards employees as a Northern Pool has. Last year, I reported that we had received reports on internal management, and the board was very positive towards the internal management of the investments of the fund. And again, this year we received a further report on that, and again we were positive. But I would point out that internal management isn't easy to do. We know there are difficulties recruiting staff, and I would draw your attention to page 8 of my report, where I quote from the Good Governance in the LGPS project, which is Scheme Advisory Board commissioned, which states that each administrative authority must give proper consideration to the utilisation of pay recruitment policies, including as appropriate market supplements relevant to the needs of their pensions function. And I would really emphasise that, because I think pensions admin and pensions investment staff across the country, and this is a fact, are in short supply. When roles are advertised, I'm just involved at the moment in recruitment to a London fund of their head of fund. There are few applicants, and so we really do need to think what administrative authorities do about paying conditions, because otherwise there will be real issues in actually recruiting people. We're mandated to look at breaches of the law. We had 1 potential breach brought to our notice by the officers. We considered that and agreed with the officers that it was a breach, but it was one which should be put in the breaches log rather than reported to the regulator. Again, I'd like to thank the members of the board for their contribution last year. All the members were very positive as always, and they bring a broad range of experience. Sadly, one of our members, Paul Wiggins, who was also a former member of your committee, died in June 2020 after a long illness. I'd just like to place on record that Paul was exemplary in both his approach to membership of the board and in his approach to all of us as individuals. And I know that all of us will miss him with great sadness, and I used to play the Paul. There is, towards the end of the report, the proposed work plan for 2021, which has been discussed between myself and the director before it's presented to the board, and that was approved by the board in September. Just to conclude, really, Chair, the Merseyside Fund operates within the overall regulatory and governance framework of the LGPS regulations and other regulatory requirements. And the reports and presentations made to the board, I think, very clearly indicate that the Merseyside Pension Fund understands and takes very seriously its present obligations, and that's extremely pleasing to report. But I would go back to what I said a few minutes ago, that in order to fulfill obligations and deliver an effective service going forward, you do really need to consider the actual resourcing of the fund going forward. And I would just, finally draw us back to that issue of recruitment and retention and the need for the administrative authority to properly consider the pay and other benefits of both investment and administrative staff. And I'll stop there, Chair, and be open to questions. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, John. Thank you for such a positive and such a comprehensive report as well, which is exactly what we've come to expect from you, and is I know highly valued. Particularly welcome your positive comments about working with officers and also the Pensions Committee. Those are very welcome and very much agreed with by myself as chair. And obviously your comments about recruitment are very pertinent, and I'm sure it will be well noted. Can I ask if any members have got any questions or comments for John? Okay, I think you've covered all the bases there, John. Thank you very much. We just about managed to hear everything you said, so thanks for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
The recommendation, thanks again, John. The recommendation is that members note the report of the independent chair of the pension board, and that members approve the amendments to the board's terms of reference, which of course are entirely logical given the circumstances we find ourselves in. So again, can I propose those recommendations and ask the vice chair for her to second, please?
Yes, I'll second those.
Thanks
Chair.
again, Councillor Povall. And again, I will take that as agreed by assent unless anyone wants to comment now. No? Okay. Thank you very much. Those recommendations are approved. So we move on to item 9, which is the investment strategy proposals. I'll hand back to Peter Wallach for this, please. Peter?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This report is an important report in terms of the approval that we're seeking, so members are asked to consider it carefully. The changes to investment strategy were discussed in some detail at an investment monitoring working party earlier this year, when both Aon and our independent advisors discussed it along with committee members that were there and officers. And the report is providing members with a copy of that presentation, and it seeks approval for officers to work with the fund's independent advisors to develop and implement the proposals. In addition, there's a supplementary agenda item that was issued, which is a letter that was received by the chair from MedAct Liverpool, and includes that letter and his response, and that's relevant to this report because it relates to the way in which the fund is addressing climate change. So there are a number of recommendations from the report. The first is that members approve the outline strategy proposals detailed in the Exempt appendix, that members authorise officers to work with the fund's independent advisors to develop and implement the proposals, with regular reports both to working parties and to this committee, that members approve the engagement of specialist investment advice and the additional staffing resources required to support the development and implementation of these strategy proposals. And if I can just mention that in the Exempt appendix, further detail is given around staffing resources, both in relation to investment, responsible investment, and the finance and compliance functions. And it would be helpful if members were able to indicate that they were supportive of the objective that we've had for the last few years to continue to deliver cost savings by developing the internal team. And then finally, that members note the letter from and the response to MedAct Liverpool. I think, as the chair helpfully pointed out in the report and accounts, the fund's funding position has improved very significantly over the last 3-6 years, and some changes were approved by this committee earlier this year to change the asset allocation to move the fund in a more defensive direction. In addition to that, along with the actuarial valuation, we undertook the usual asset liability modelling studies, which took into account the usual investment risks such as interest rate risk, inflation risk, longevity and so on. But additionally this time we undertook some climate scenario risk analysis modelling, which we've been working on for the last 18 months. In fact, members will be aware that back in 2016, approval was given by committee to align the fund's investment strategy with the Paris goals. And then in 2018, we undertook a review of the fund's investment beliefs, and some responsible investment beliefs were developed in consultation with committee members, with the pension board, and those were approved in early 2019. And the climate scenario risk analysis has been undertaken to further inform the process. And with the proposed changes to our investment strategy, the recommendation is that we also, as we're making changes to the underlying assets, at the same time we use the opportunity to integrate ESG and climate risk considerations in a more complete way. Things have been put in place for the last few years, but it seems opportune to us to move. In the private sector, the Department of Work and Pensions is currently undertaking a consultation which will require pension funds of over £1 billion to publish their response to climate risk. And I was speaking to MHCLG this afternoon, and they indicated they were intending to bring a similar proposal with a similar timeline for local government funds. And it seems prudent for us to, in a sense, keep on the front foot, to put changes in place ahead of things being mandated. Section 3 of the report does set out for members what is required under your fiduciary duties. And I think, to be clear, not all the things that I'm seeking approval for today are mandatory or statutory, but it seems prudent to officers and advisors from a risk perspective to put these changes in train. They won't happen quickly. The expectation is they'll happen over 3 or 4 years, and the intention is that we work up proposals, bring them back to this committee for further approval in relation to the detail. I can go through the report in more detail, Chair, but I hope that's a fair summary of the paper before you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Peter. Yes, as you said at the beginning, this is a particularly important report. As we've said already, the funding position of the fund has improved very, very significantly in recent years and has reached a very favourable position that's been discussed at length in other meetings. So it's entirely logical that you would want to adjust your investment strategy on the back of that, and I'm sure, well, I for one, I'm very supportive of the direction of travel in that respect. You've mentioned the staffing requirements that will come out of that. I think it's worth noting that the evidence to date is very positive in terms of taking more work in-house, and the savings that has delivered and the benefits that has delivered. And I know Pensions Committee has been very supportive of those moves in the past as well. Obviously, I very much welcome your comments regarding climate risk. Entirely appropriate to move ahead of the curve as we have done in the past, and to keep on the front foot, as you say, in reducing the growing financial risk that is posed by our ever-changing climate. And in that respect, I would like to thank MedAct Liverpool for their approach to the committee and the proposals they made and the response, which are detailed in the agenda supplement. I think that's been a positive contribution, and I know they've been pleased with the response of the fund that they have received. So those are my comments. I'm sure myself or Peter happy to take any questions or indeed any comments that any members would like to add to those already given. Yeah, Councillor Povall.
Yes, I'd just like to echo all that you've just said, Pat, there. I think we're moving along great, let's put it that way. Despite all the problems that COVID has thrown up, we're going in the right direction, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Cherry. Anybody else want to make a comment, ask a question? If not, I think given the importance of this report, I will read out the recommendations in full before seeking approval. So the recommendations are that members approve the outline investment strategy proposals detailed in the appendix, that members authorise officers to work with the fund's independent advisors to develop and implement the proposals with regular progress reports to the Investment Monitoring Working Party and this Pensions Committee, that members approve the engagement of specialist investment advice and the additional staffing resources required to support the development and implementation of the investment strategy proposals, and finally that members note the letter from and the response to MedAct Liverpool. So I will formally move those recommendations and again ask the Vice Chair if she is happy to second.
Yes, I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you very much. Again, I'll take approval by assent unless anybody wants to speak now. Okay, so those recommendations are approved. Thank you all very much. Item 10 is the LGPS update, and I think we're going to bring in Yvonne Murphy to deliver this report. Are you there, Yvonne?
I am indeed. Can you hear me?
We can indeed. Very good evening to you.
Great.
We can hear and see you.
Good evening, everybody. The most pressing matter within the LGPS report relates to the Treasury's policy to limit exit payments for public sector employees at a value of £95,000 and how these Treasury overrides and regulations sit with MHCLG's proposals on reform and local government exit pay. The key noting point at section 3.3 of the report is that the Treasury has confirmed that employer-funded early access to pensions, which we call pension strain, is included in the 95 exit payment cap. And also further to the information contained in the report, I can inform you that the Treasury regulations implementing the exit cap across the public sector do come into force this Wednesday in the form of the restriction of public sector exit regulations 2020. These regs affect LGPS members who are over age 55 and are made redundant. As currently under the current regulations, benefits must be paid without actuarial reductions. However, under the new Treasury provisions, when the cap is breached, a member's pension must be reduced accordingly. MCLG is looking at options to introduce choice to allow members to opt for a deferred pension instead of having to access a reduced pension. This option is contained within the open consultation on reform and local government exit pay and the draft LGPS compensation regulations. Unfortunately, these proposals go much further than the Treasury regs, as they impact all members regardless of whether or not their exit packages exceed the £95,000 cap. The intent is to reduce strain costs by the statutory redundancy payment, and where the strain is paid, in the main, discretionary severance payments aren't allowed. These proposals add a number of options of how members could access their redundancy payment, but in most cases, all options lead to a significantly reduced redundancy package and complexity for members in understanding the financial position. The LGPS consultation implementing the revised regs doesn't close until the 18th of December and presents us with challenges due to the misalignment of the two sets of regulations and is causing a lot of controversy within the industry at the moment. This issue is high on the government's agenda, and the local government minister issued a letter last week to admin authorities stating that funds should act in line with their legal duties and acknowledge the intent that public bodies shouldn't make exit payments in excess of the £95,000 cap. The Scheme Advisory Board has sought legal advice on this conflicting regulatory position, and it's published commentary for funds and employers to consider their stance. Unfortunately, we are in a precarious position of either not acting in line with the government policy or not actually applying the LGPS regulations as currently drafted. There isn't any course of action that doesn't result in a risk of challenge, and clarity will only be achieved once a challenge has been resolved through the courts. although SAB has provided a logical opinion that the course of action presenting the least risk to admin authorities and scheme employers is for the fund to offer a fully reduced benefit and for the employer to delay making payments of any cash alternatives to cover the strain costs which is permitted under the new Treasury regulations under Regulation 8. Taking this stance will allow room for manoeuvre following the outcome of any challenges brought by the scheme member or possibly the government. It is noteworthy that if we do pay an unreduced pension, it may be subject to challenge by the government on the grounds of implied repeal, as it's the government's view that the current LGPS regs are curtailed as a consequence of the exit regs coming into force. A successful challenge will result in the administering authority by the government being found to have acted ultra-vires and would need to reclaim the pension from the member. Having considered the risk faced by the funds, I am satisfied that the opinion provided by SAB is currently the best approach, and I have informed our employers today of our stance for them to consider their position. There are a number of judicial reviews being lodged by the unions at the moment and along with the lawyers in local governments, and they're looking for the Treasury regs to be delayed or redacted. The fund's draft response to the consultation on the LGPS reforms has been shared with the chairs of both Pensions Committee and Pensions Board tonight, and once approved we will circulate it with our employers. The proposed changes to the regs will affect the fund's governance arrangements with the need to segregate employers, as some employers aren't affected by the Treasury regs. There's also significant impact on retirement processes, information flows and communications. That was all I was going to cover from today's report. There are other issues in there relating to contribution changes, mid-valuation and a ministerial statement on survivor benefits, but I thought I'd just take you through the most pressing matter which is causing a lot of controversy at the moment, which is the 95 exit cap. Happy to take any questions on the content. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Yvonne. And obviously some very pressing issues and controversial issues contained there. There are obviously potential implications for the staffing resources within the fund. Could you just say a little bit more?
Of course. There's obviously
increased staffing on the back of all of this.
Okay, there's obviously, as I say, there's contentions at the moment around the 95k cap and how we are going to administer the pension fund for anybody who does exceed the 95 cap. Also, when the LGPS regulations come into force, the timeline, the consultation on the regulations has been delayed, but it's looking very likely that they're going to be brought into effect before the systems are upgraded. So there's going to be lots of manual calculations, and also before we get our communications intact to communicate this with the members. So it's going to be really difficult on our resource. Also, all the information around the ministerial statement where we have to relook at widowers' pensions. I'll have to go back to 1972 because that's when deferred benefits come up. That's going to potentially create a huge amount of work along with the McCLOUD work. That's all also going to be going on until 2022 and beyond. So yeah, massive implications for staff, and I'll be looking at particularly around the McCLOUD issues because that's the most pressing at the moment in relation to staff and of how we resource that.
Okay, thanks, Yvonne. Obviously, the next item refers to the McCLOUD judgment. I'm sure every member will be concerned about the resource implications of what you've just outlined. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the back of Yvonne's report? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands going up. So in that case, I will move the recommendation that members note the report and the resource implications in administering imminent changes to the regulations. So I will move that. Can I ask the Vice Chair to second that, please?
Yes, I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Cherry. Again, I will take that by assent unless anybody wants to speak otherwise now. Okay, thank you. That recommendation is approved. So we'll stay with you, Yvonne, for item 11, which is the proposed McCLOUD judgment remedy and LGPS consultation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chair. This report covers the MATLG's consultation, which was published in July, setting out the proposed remedy for the McCLOUD case within the LGPS and the fund's response, which is attached as an appendix. The summary of the proposals are listed in section 3.11 of the report, but the key feature of the remedy is that the final salary underpin is going to be extended to a wider group of members for service up to the 31st of March 2022. There are a number of unexpected additions resulting in the requirement to revisit post-2014 leavers and to carefully consider the operational resource impacts. There's also a proposal to introduce a two-stage process to calculate a provisional underpin when members leave without accessing benefits and to communicate the position to members. That position may change multiple times prior to retirement, and this will cause confusion and uncertainty with our members. The remedy brings significant challenges to the fund in relation to governance, data, communications and training. The number of in-scope members for MPF is over 34,000. We've got 6,500 deferred benefits that have left since 2014 and 5,500 pensioners that we'd have to revisit, and plus the fact there's 21,000 active members that we have to make sure their records and the data are McCLOUD ready for us to be able to do the calculations going forward. But that there's 34,000 people, but it's actually not expected that the underpin will actually result in an increase in pension for many members. But the admin activity to do all that work is obviously going to be a mammoth task, and also communicate that to our members. A lot of work. We need to do it, otherwise we'll be breaching the regulations, but for little benefits at the end of it. One of the things that we just discussed is that the fund really needs to consider whether we require additional staff, and there's also obviously going to be an effect on resources and costs for employers. Another issue that we're considering is at the 2019 valuation, employers were given the option to include an allowance for McCLOUD in their contribution rates. While most employers chose to make provision in their contribution rates, we wouldn't expect to revisit their allowance until the next valuation. But there were some employers who didn't make provision, and the FSS, the Fund and Strategy Statement, allows us to revisit this position if appropriate. The 5 Merseyside councils didn't actually make provision in their race, and we're currently in discussion with the finance directors, taking into account affordability due to the impact on COVID-19 on the council's budgets. The fund response to the consultation essentially supports the fundamental principle to remove the age criteria and extend the underpin to younger scheme members. The key focus of our response was in regard to the operational practicalities and communication challenges in implementing the remedy. Happy to take any questions on any resource issues or what the McCLOUD remedy actually means for us as administering the government's intent. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne, and even more workload for yourself and colleagues as a result of this. Could I just thank you for the way you've been dealing with this and the response to the government consultation, and also thank John Raisin as chair of the pension board for his contribution to that effort as well. So I think we're all getting a very clear picture about the way these kind of moves are impacting on the fund and the implications that has for your workload and for resourcing as a result. Any questions or comments for Yvonne? If not, I will then move to the recommendation, which is long, but I think it's important that we read it out in public so that once the outcome of the consultation is finalised, the implementation of the final remedy will be required under legislation and informed by statutory guidance. It is therefore recommended that Pension Committee instruct officers to develop a project plan and any associated work streams to comply with the scale of retrospective benefit calculations in compliance with the Local Government Pension Scheme Regulations 2020. So I will move approval of those recommendations. Again, can I ask the Vice Chair to second that, please?
Yes, I will second that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you again. And again, I will take approval by assent unless anybody wants to comment otherwise. Almost, not quite. Okay, thank you all members. That those recommendations are approved. And thank you, Yvonne, again.
Thank you all.
Item 12 is the retail prices index reform, and we're going to hand back to Peter for this, please. Peter Wallach, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report explains a government consultation on the retail prices index. It's a widely quoted index, but the government identified some flaws in its calculation a few years ago, 2013, and it's still calculated and used, but less widely. It's mainly been supplanted by the consumer prices index, but importantly, it's still used for calculating inflation relating to index-linked gilts. As a pension fund, we're quite substantial holders of index-linked gilts. The consultation proposes moving from RPI to CPIH calculation from either 2025 or 2030 or sometime in between. The purpose of the consultation is to seek views on that, and as a pension fund we've responded and our response is attached. I think the 2 points I would make is that it would have potentially a material impact on the fund. So one example cited in the consultation is that we have £39 million worth of an index-linked gilt that matures in 2055. Was the government to make the change without compensation, then that would immediately wipe £8 million off the value of that gilt, or about 21%. We also, as a pension fund, have certain infrastructure projects, which again, some of the revenues are linked to RPI. One or two of our properties have rental increases that are linked to RPI. So we are concerned that due regard is given to the wider implications of any reform, and I think that's reflected in our response, Chair. So it's a fairly technical matter, but it does have some financial implications for the fund if the changes are to be made without a due regard or compensation.
Indeed, thank you, Peter. As you say, the response you've provided details the implications of the proposed reforms, the concerns about the consultation's rather narrow remit, and a call for an independent process to examine the economic implications of the proposed reforms, all of which I'm very happy to endorse. Again, I will pass over to the committee members if anybody wants to make a comment or ask a question. If not, I will therefore move the recommendation that members note the report and the fund's response to the consultation. Can I ask the Vice Chair to second that, please?
Yes, I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thanks very much again, Councillor Povall. Again, I will take that by assent unless anybody wants to indicate otherwise. Thank you, members. That recommendation is approved. We will stay with the Director of Pensions for item 13, the investment performance. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. This report is really superfluous because you drew attention to the investment report in the annual report and accounts. I produce this as a separate report because it's sort of lost in the detail of that report. So it just confirms the fund's performance over 1, 3 and 5 years. Members will be aware that at the 31st of March, markets had fallen quite sharply as a consequence of the pandemic. And it's pleasing that the way that the fund is defensively positioned meant that we fell by just over 2% relative to our benchmark, which fell by more than 5%. And the average LGPS fund certainly fell by about 4.5%. So that was beneficial to us in terms of our positioning, and in general our performance is very solid.
Indeed it is, Peter. Yeah, we've remarked on that several times, and the committee is obviously extremely grateful for all the work that has contributed to that. I mentioned earlier about the above benchmark performance in terms of 1, 3 and 5 years. This report shows that over a 10-year period we're also ahead of benchmark, so very positive. Any questions or comments on this report? Yes, Councillor Povall.
Can I just ask Peter's view on the American election? I mean, your comment on his effect on starting his trade war with China. What do you think the effect's going to be if he doesn't get elected, or alternatively, he does get elected?
The view seems to be that if the president, if Mr. Biden is appointed as a Democratic president, then there'll be a very significant fiscal stimulus package, which will be very positive for the economy. And he's particularly focusing on infrastructure and benefits for lower paid workers. So certain areas of the economy would benefit around infrastructure, around construction, around utilities. Equally, if President Trump was to be reappointed, I think the expectation is that there'd be a continuation of those policies, which would mean that we'd see the market sectors that have done well already continuing to perform. So tech stocks would continue to perform, as would healthcare. I think there are certain healthcare reforms expected under a Democratic ticket. So it's almost two sides of a picture, but I think markets are feeling, almost regardless of the outcome, it's going to be positive for the US economy.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I hope that covers your question, Cherry. Anybody else want to make a comment or ask a question? No. If not, then I will just move the recommendation that members note the report. Can the Vice Chair second that, please?
Yes, I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you. And again, I will take that by assent unless anybody wants to speak otherwise. Okay, thank you, members. Item 14 is the local pension board minutes. So I'll bring John Raisin back in now if you want to speak to those, John.
To be honest, I haven't really got too much to say about them. They just recorded the last meeting that we had. I think everything is there before you in the minutes.
Okay, John. Yeah, thank you for that. They are just there for noting. I would just highlight what you say at one stage in the or what is stated in the minutes, that pension board members commented that the performance of the fund's investment strategy was a lot better than might be expected and commended the fund's investment team. So again, just another acknowledgement of the positive performance of the fund. So again, we are recommended to note the minutes of the local pension board. Again, I will move that recommendation and ask the Vice Chair to second.
Yes, happy to second, Chair.
Thank you for your patience and persistence on that, Vice Chair. Again, I will take that by assent unless anybody wants to indicate otherwise. So those minutes are accordingly approved. Item 15 is the National Knowledge Assessment, which Peter will report to us on. Thank you, Peter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The purpose of the National Knowledge Assessment, as it sounds, is to provide LGPS funds with an insight to pension-specific knowledge and understanding of those holding decision-making and oversight responsibility within their organisations. It was undertaken both by members of the Pension Board and of Pensions Committee. There's been increasing scrutiny of public sector pension schemes over the last 5 or 6 years, and there's currently some work going on which the chair of the Pension Board alluded to, called the Good Governance Project. At the moment, there's a statutory requirement for pension board members to undertake training in relation to pensions matters. That isn't mandatory for members of Pensions Committee, but nonetheless, it's best practice for members to undertake training, and members will be aware that we do have a fairly well-developed member development programme. In addition, there's the, as 3.2 indicates, there's MiFID II, which in order for the pension fund to be elected as a professional investor, there is again a requirement to demonstrate a threshold amount of knowledge by the pensions committee. So the assessment was undertaken. It's attached as an appendix to this report. Members can go through that. There were 8 areas of knowledge that were tested, if I can use that expression. Those are set out in section 3.5. I'm pleased that Merseyside Pension Fund scored well relative to most of the funds that participated in the study, but nonetheless, understandably identified certain knowledge gaps, and that will help inform future development plans. So I'd like to thank those committee members that participated. And as I say, the appendix is more detailed and has some useful information for members. Thank you, Chair. So members are asked to note the report.
Thank you, Peter, and I would just add my thanks as well to everybody who completed that survey and the positive outcome that resulted from that, and obviously the recommendations going forward, which will help to inform our training for members. Any questions for Peter on that? Obviously there is material in the exempt part of the agenda as well, which we can come back to. But if not, I will just move the recommendation that members note the report and work with officers to identify and undertake training and development opportunities appropriate to their needs. And again, can I ask the Vice Chair to second that, please?
Yes, seconded, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And I will take that by assent unless anybody wants to indicate otherwise. Thank you, members. That recommendation is approved. That takes us to item 16, which is the Northern LGPS update, which is basically the approval of minutes in the exempt part of the agenda. Do you want to speak to that at all, Peter, now?
Only to say that there have been 2 pool meetings since committee met in February, and the minutes of those meetings are attached for members' information.
Thank you, Peter. And I would just point to the content in those minutes that indicates our positive performance, not just against benchmark, but against our colleagues in Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire as well, which is particularly pleasing, I'm sure, to everybody. Again, we'll come back to that in the exempt part of the agenda, but the recommendation is that members approve the minutes as attached as an appendix to the report. I will move that and again ask the Vice Chair to second.
Yes, seconded, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, and again take that by assent unless anybody wants to indicate otherwise. Thank you, members. That recommendation is approved. Item 17 is minutes of the working party meetings, which again are contained in the exempt part of the agenda. Again, Peter, do you want to speak to those at all, or are we happy just to move the recommendation for members to approve those minutes?
Happy just to move the recommendation, Chair.
Okay, unless there's any questions around that, I will move to the recommendation.
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Povall. So that recommendation to approve those minutes, again, I will take by assent unless there's any indication to the contrary. Thank you, members. Item 18 is exempt information, exclusion of members of the public. I'll just read out the formal text here. So the following items contain exempt information, and the recommendation is that under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined by the relevant paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A to that Act. The public interest test has been applied and favours exclusion. So I will move that recommendation and again ask the Vice Chair to second, please.
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Povall. Again, I will take that by assent unless anybody indicates otherwise. Thank you all. That recommendation to exclude members of the public from the remaining items of the agenda is approved. So I'll just pause here and wait for confirmation that the webcast has been stopped.